and welcome to this presentation on Vivekachudamani. And I'm not going to get into too much description ahead of it because the slides really do contain what this is all about. So without further ado, okay, so first, before we really delve into the topic, we will look at what knowledge is and or how this works in this tradition. And if you really think about it, knowledge is something which requires a means. So you'll see here on the slide, pramana is a means of knowledge, and that's what the word means. It's a Sanskrit word, and it means means of knowledge. And no knowledge can take place without a means of knowledge. So, and for instance, in order to see color and form, you need your eyes. So your eyes serve as a means of knowledge to see color and form. Your ears cannot see color and form, much less your eyes can hear. So if there are no defects in the senses, i.e. your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your skin, then they will reveal exactly what they sense when they come in contact with their objects of perception. They are not interchangeable, and it is wholly factual to say they do what they do. In other words, eyes see color and form, ears hear, and nose smells, and so on. So how does that relate to what we're talking about here? Here we are looking at what is the absolute truth. The overall topic of any spiritual pursuit is really about what is the absolute truth. And so if you have to really understand what that is, you have to then, first of all, describe it. So here what we're saying is, just as your eyes act as a means of knowledge for you to see color and form, the words act. I'm using words right now. That's all I'm using is lots of words. These words, when they describe the truth, are then the means of knowledge for you to discover what the truth is. And so they have to be, they have to match it. And any other kinds of words are not going to describe it. So, and here's the irony here, is that even though people will say, well, the truth is the truth, and the truth is beyond all words, it escapes any definition. So how can you possibly talk about the truth and use words in the same breath? Because words have challenges. So here, this is why, the irony, there's a lot of paradox in all of this, as you'll see as we move forward. And one of the paradoxes is that even though the vision of the truth escapes all definition and all words, still, in order to say that, we are using words to describe what cannot be described by words. So if that doesn't get your head spinning, I don't know what will. And from that perspective, too, we are talking of the truth is something which is limitless. So if the truth is something which is limitless, yet here we are using what? We're using words that are limited. So limited words somehow have to present or describe what the truth is. And so therefore, in this tradition, we get very, very persnickety about the words, the use of the words, because not to describe the truth in using the right words, or not to use the right words to describe the truth, it's like you're trying to hear with your eyes or see with your ears, okay? And that's just not possible. So we are then, or as I give the example also, if you want to know what photosynthesis is, you can't use words that are describing quantum physics, okay? So the words have to match what they are talking about. And here we are talking about the absolute truth. And how it relates to you, that's the most important part. We'll get to that. But here's then people sometimes say, well, you can't get too caught up in the words, if the truth really goes beyond all the words. But at the same time, if you don't use the right words, you are not going to understand what the truth is all about. And so, we're not over-functioning or being strongly opinionated when we talk about the use of these words and how they have to be very exacting. And you're going to see more about that as we go along. Because if I started getting into all the for instances and examples, we'd never get to the text. So you'll see it as we go through and look at some of the verses and understand how that relates to the whole subject matter. So in the same vein as what I just said, the means of knowledge, a means of knowledge is a means of knowledge. It is not a philosophy. And again, a lot of people would say, potato, potato, who cares? Tomato, tomato. It's all the same. What are you making a big deal out of this? And we make a big deal out of it because philosophy is, first of all, it's a word that came long after this tradition was in place. And secondly, it is not aptly describing what this is all about. And using that example of, if you are talking about a means of knowledge, it unfolds exactly what is intended to do. Again, your eyes can see color and form. And for your eyes to see color and form, they act as a means of knowledge. So you don't call it a philosophy that your eyes see color and form. And in the same way here, philosophy is something that people bandy about, and they use that term in this context. And what we're saying is that philosophy, because every man on the street, so to speak, has a philosophy, and every person throughout their lives keeps changing their philosophy based upon their experiences. And philosophy is understood to be something that has its capacity to change as people discover something more about it. Then philosophy is not something that you want to use here. Why? Because you are talking about the truth. If the truth is something which keeps changing, then you can use the word philosophy. But truth is something which is absolute. It does not change. How it does not change is what we will be seeing, and why, and so on. And how it relates to you. So you can't then go around calling this a philosophy, because it is something that is not changing, and it will have to meet the standards of not changing. This is part of our exercise. As we go through these verses, you're going to see this, that we have to really say, okay, if that truth that we are looking at is really not changing, then it has to hold up. It has to be solid. It has to be something that proves itself. And if it fails to meet that standard, then it's not the truth. And if it fails that way, it's not worth pursuing, because it's not the truth. If what you want is a truth, and what you want is something that is not changing, then you have to be sure that what you're looking at is something that is valid. And it can be valid, again, or the validity of it is proven or established because it is a means of knowledge. And if this isn't making a whole heck of a lot of sense right now, don't worry about that, because, again, as we get into all of the finer nuances of this and explore what this is all about, it will become more clear. Right now, I'm just setting the stage for the text itself, because it's important. If you don't have this at the get-go, the rest of it's going to be fuzzy. So further, to reveal the truth, we have what is known as a methodology. So the words act as a means of knowledge, and they are used not only to fully describe it, but to leave no room for doubt or error. This is critical again. So if in case, you weren't necessarily aware that you're going to be doing some head scratching Well, brace yourselves, because you're going to be doing some of that, some exploration. I maintain that it's a lot of fun. Of course, that's me, but I think you'll find it quite enjoyable. So this is the goal of Vivekachudamani. It's to really give that presentation and that understanding. And here's your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to see whether or not it does its job. And the tradition of teaching as envisioned by Vedanta is to present the truth, utilizing words that act as a means of knowledge and leaving no stone unturned. And here we've got 581 verses that are presented. So this text is something that leaves nothing out, nothing left over, and most importantly, nothing wanting or nothing more to be desired. This is indeed a tall order, but Shankara handles it masterfully. And so our challenge, of course, is to, since we can't do 581 verses, we are going to just pick out the quintessential verses that present this overall format structure. And it's we often give the example of, we're going to give you the outline of the elephant. So the verses that we use are like, if you draw the outline of the elephant, when everybody looks at it, they know it's an elephant. You don't need all the details, because you just need to see the outline and know it's an elephant. So in the same way here, the verses that we are going to pick from these 581 verses are like giving you the outline of the elephant, so that you will see what it is all about, and you should come away with not only that understanding and vision, but a way in which you too are able to, absorb it, see it as your own. Because the idea again is, this is not an intellectual, an intellectual exploration, investigation. It strikes at the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is the very nature of the person who is in pursuit of this. And that it has to show you how you are related to this whole pursuit. What is your connection to it? And what do you get from it? Because if you're not getting anything from it, again, we're wasting our time. So you got to have a takeaway, and that's what we're also going to be intent upon delivering. So before we get into the actual text, just a few more things. If you're not familiar with the Vedantic tradition, I'm just going to say a few words about that. The first is that Vedanta is a topic or a subject matter, a study that comes at the end of the Vedas. Veda plus Anta. Veda means knowledge, Anta means end. So Veda plus Anta equals Vedanta. And therefore, Vedanta, what comes at the end of the Vedas, is what they call the Upanishads. And the Upanishads, there's a lot of explanation around that. But basically, it unfolds what also is being presented in Vivekachudamani. In fact, a lot of verses are taken from the Upanishads and expressed in some way, shape, or form in Vivekachudamani. That's one of the reasons why it's a nice text to take. And the Vedas themselves have no author, and they are just handed down from one generation to the next. So this, as a means of knowledge, is duly and faithfully unfolding exactly what it is. So in addition to that, in this tradition, it's unique, because all these, unlike in other sort of spiritual pursuits or world religions, they have founders. Buddhism has Buddha, Christianity has Christ, Islam has Muhammad, so they all have founders. In the Vedic tradition, there's no founders. The tradition has been there since the beginning. That's what they say. Nobody started it. And so even the avatars, like Rama and Krishna and others that are described, They were all born. So the great seers, the sages, all these people who have come, are found in this pursuit of the Vedas or Vedanta, were all born into something that was already there. They didn't start it. And they recognize, a true teacher of this tradition recognizes that I am just a conduit. I'm just passing this down. It's going from the teacher to the student. And also, they didn't make it up, just so you know. This isn't their spin. This isn't something that they decided this is how it should be. And they started writing something. The tradition itself is just the content, and I don't want to get into this because it'll take time, but just right off the top say simply that the amazing thing about the Vedas and Vedanta is that they were originally memorized and handed down from one generation to the next by memorization. And as a result of that, you would think that there would be some variations, big differences between one and the other. And if you can envision, this was being done all over India. India isn't it's not like Rhode Island. India is a big country. And yet they had all over, everybody was memorizing these texts, which again, it's not just a booklet. These are Jayujic texts that were, and the Vedic part, the first part and the second part, all being memorized. And yet you consistently find that there hasn't been any variation from, in all these thousands upon thousands of years. So this is why they say there's no authorship to it. The job was just to learn it and pass it on. And so, and in that vein, just giving the example of in the Western context of discoverers, people who discover something, Galileo, Newton, Edison, Einstein, they discover something, they don't create it. They themselves are the discoverers. Being the discoverers, then they figure out how to make use of it. And even though, you've got Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics and so on, but still, all they're doing is discovering something that is already there. That's the point. So anytime as something is just discovered, and knowledge is like that. Nobody creates knowledge. Knowledge is nothing but a discovery of something that is already there, and thereafter you can make use of it. And so that's exactly what happened here. And those who study and pursue it then are on the receiving end of whatever it has to offer. So since this text is sourced from the traditional Vedantic texts, such as the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita, among others, it begins with a nod of recognition to that teaching tradition from whence it flows. In the vein of but for, the fact that my teacher, Swami Dayananda, taught me, and who is recognized by reference here, I would not be able to pass it on to you. So, but for his teaching me, I would not be able to pass it on to you. Similarly, Shankara opens the text with the salute to his teacher, Govindapada, because but for Govindapada, Shankara could not have written this text. Okay? So Vivekachudamani, the Crest-Jewel of Discrimination, opens with this acknowledgement, and I'll chant it. Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Satgurum Pranatosmyaham. So I salute Sri Govinda, who is the unsurpassable teacher, who is the embodiment of absolute fullness, who is the most accomplished knower of the essence of Vedanta, who is beyond the reach of the known instruments of perception, transcends the sensory world. So I'm not going to get into breaking down exactly what the nuances of this verse are, because we're going to see it as we go through and look at these various verses. But basically to say that everything that you get from this is because of that tradition, and it's because of teachers like Govinda and Shankara, who, are expressing exactly what they learned and what they understood. And so with that, we now begin to look at, okay, so that sounds good, but what is it that they did? And why are we looking at this text? And what are you going to get from it? Because again, the bottom line is you got to get something from it. If you're not getting anything from this, it's useless. So we have to start in this way. We start by first, and this is how the text opens, by first setting the stage, so to speak, about who is the one who is in search of this. How would that person be described? What do they look like? What do they wear? How do they talk? So these are the kind, and what, of course, ultimately, in this context, and this is pretty much how the verse starts, it says, well, guess what? They don't have a specific dress, much less they have a kind of accent, nor do they have a soft tone per se. It's not about what their tone is. It's not about, how they dress. It's not about what they eat. None of these are things that are necessary per se, or necessarily critical to understanding what type of mentality this person has. And also, in understanding this, you understand this is no small thing. So that's exactly what is said here. For you to be inquiring into this text is no small thing. Because he says out of the gate, attaining a human birth is rare. All right? So I don't know if you've ever given any thought to that, but little did you know that being born as a human being is no small thing. Because, and in this context, and I could go off on a topic on, karma and reincarnation. That's another discussion in and of itself. I'll say this much, and then if people want to talk about it more when we hit the question and answer period, we can. But in terms of birth means that you were born into a setup, okay? You have a body that you were born with. So, and you also have a mind. So all of these things are things that you did not specifically create, but you found yourself with. You found yourself with the parents that you have. You found yourself with the family siblings that you have, and with your spouses, and with your children. This is all what they call karma. Karma means what? The law of cause and effect. Okay? So the law of cause and effect means that as you perform an action, there will be a reaction. Newton's law, actually. So you do something, you get a result. So when you perform an action, and you will get a result. Sometimes the result doesn't happen right away. Sometimes it takes time. It all depends on what is the action and what is the result that is sought. So this is nothing more than the law of cause and effect. And cause and effect means that in order to gain a certain birth with a certain mind, with a certain interest, is no small thing. This is where you get to pat yourselves on the back. Because how many people do you know that are thinking about stuff like this? All right? More often than not, you're not meeting people who are strongly inclined to pursue any form of self-inquiry, much less seek a greater vision and a freedom from life's challenges. And not in this way, anyway. So the text starts off by saying, somebody who does this is somebody who is fully mature, who has a clear and dharmic mind, meaning they do the right thing and they have a certain clarity of vision. And further, that person has to be spiritually focused. And they are someone who reads or has an interest in sacred texts. and not only has that interest, but they also understand what is being said. So all of these, he says, they're not ordinary. People that have these interests are not ordinary people. And further, in what they understand, they learn through that study that the difference between what is really real and what is unreal. And further, in that what is really real, they discover the non-duality of all beings and realize that total freedom is also your inherent nature. Everybody has a craving for total freedom. Nobody wants to be limited or small. And so through this study, if that study is presented or if that knowledge is presented properly, you will discover what? That you are already free. And it's not just to say, a lot of times people say, oh, just relax, you're free. No sweat. Don't worry. But, and even if you repeat, I am free, I am free, I am free, I am free, what happens? You get mad because here you are, you're supposed to be free, yet you're not feeling too free. So this is where what is being presented shows you how you are free and who is that person who is pursuing this. This has to be described. It has to be unfolded, because otherwise, again, you're walking around with a fuzzy mind if these things are not presented. But here he's saying a person who has a minimum of this type of interest, for such a person, this is the outcome of what? The result of thousands. They really say hundreds of thousands. Crores is the word that's used. Hundreds of thousands of births in which a person has lived life intelligently. Okay? Because life gets squandered a lot of times. People throw their lives away. This is the really not only a waste but a disaster. Because again, karma, the results, you are on the receiving end of whatever you do. We have that expression, what goes around comes around, isn't it? And the Bible itself says, as you sow, so shall you reap. This is all karma, the law of cause and effect. So if somebody, is not paying attention or is reckless and careless, then they bring about their own problems. And they bring about births that are full of challenges, sadly. So anyway, next slide. So then he says, and I'm not going to read because of time constraints, I won't read the Sanskrit now. Maybe next time when I think the verses are a little bit shorter, we can do that. But anyway, here he's saying, then verse 3 talks about what? That person who has also reached a mental maturity. So, what is that maturity? It means that it's a person who is keen on and able to pursue liberation. So again, it's not an ordinary person. It's a person who's tapped in. This is where I would submit again. You can pat yourselves on the back if you're so inclined, because this is really, describing anybody who puts their mind to it and in earnest and has an unflinching desire to get there. It's what we call we use parlance here of, we're going big or we're going home. That's it. I'm going big or I'm going home. So going big means what? I want to get my mind and arms, if you will, wrapped around this once and for all. I want to really see what this is, and I want to get it. Whatever it takes, I want to get it. Another expression they use is the person's hair is on fire. Okay, so there's a real intent upon solving this or addressing and making the mind clear, abundantly clear. And that person then has to seek out a teacher and be prepared to inquire. Study is nothing but the inquiry. Some people say, study. I'm done studying. I don't want to study anymore. I study. This is just like one more thing, and my mind is all tapped out. I don't have the energy for that. But really speaking, this type of study is not something that is dull. Why? It's not dull because it's about you. You're not dull. Okay? So you as who you are is a very dynamic, enlivened being. And discovering how you are dynamic and enlivened and how you are, the very essence of everything, that's fun. And it's also like a puzzle to be solved. And I also have this expression of, if we're not having fun, we're done. Okay? So this is something where we're going to pursue this, and in the process of the pursuit, it's a fun discovery. It's a wondrous discovery because it presents to you the very nature of yourself and allows you to see exactly how you are connected, how you are, who you are, and going beyond all of it. So, and he says in this context, anybody who heads in that direction, being possessed of these traits, is indeed rare. It's not enough to say what he said in the second verse, which is crores of births it takes. He says even further, this is indeed rare, and it is also due to many previous and sincere efforts. In fact, in the actual verse, it says, again, it takes lots and lots of births to get this far. So it's no small thing, which is why you can pat yourself on the back. Okay, so going further, he says, it is unfathomable to imagine that having gained a human birth, endowed with maturity and a strong intent to know this study, the Shastra, that such a mature person would turn their backs on it and not strive. Having come this far, this is not something that you want to just say, you know what, I'm done with it. We always say, keep pushing, keep turning those stones over, keep looking, because the mind has to resolve itself and answer these questions, and it will not rest until it does. And for anybody who does not do this, he says, that is committing suicide. Meaning what? Anytime you focus on something which is not really real, and you wrap your mind and your life around, all the things that are coming and going, then you can do that. And we're going to see how this works in the next couple of verses, actually. But just briefly saying that there's a difference between pursuing what is real and what is unreal. And anytime a person wraps or puts too much emphasis on what is unreal, they are as though committing suicide because they are wasting their minds and their energy on something that's not going to last. So we'll see how that works as we get through these verses. So next slide. Okay. And I would say that this is the beginning of that. It's saying, and actually 8 is really where it hits. But anyway, verses 5 and 6. Any such fool, and those are not, those aren't my words. That's what it says. Any such fool who, having come so far, yet who remains immersed in the scriptures, performing sacrifices and elaborate rituals, and endlessly propitiating the gods, yet does not seek the truth of one's ultimate identity with the Absolute, shall not achieve anything, much less liberation, even in hundreds of thousands of births, and as a highly respected member of the most noble societies. So this is pretty strong language. It's saying, and it's in the context of the Vedas, but you can extrapolate it into anything where people who are spiritually inclined, yet really their spirituality is focused on getting more and more. It's called artha, the pursuit of artha. Artha in Sanskrit means the pursuit of security. They want more and more and more, and they use religious practices or spiritual practices to get it. So they're taking a pot shot at those guys and women. Anybody who pursues, being spiritual and turns their minds or does not focus on what is absolute, they are never going to, get anywhere, because that will never result in freedom or liberation. So on that note, I'll just do a sidebar here and simply say what they're saying is that all forms of spiritual practices or any practices that are related to the pursuit of what they call securities or pleasures are, they are what they are. But a person recognizes what? In other contexts, they talk about a person who sees their limitations. They are all limiting pursuits. Why? Because any pursuit, no matter whether it's secular, materialistic or anything, any pursuit begins in time and it ends in time. So it's an action. An action is something that begins in time and it ends in time. So what does that tell you? The result that comes from such a pursuit will also begin in time and end in time. And if somebody is good with, having actions that begin and end and results that begin and end, what we call limited, if people say they just want limited stuff, then knock yourself out. But if you want what is limitless, this is again, what separates somebody who pursues this from the pack. Somebody who pursues this subject matter, and in whatever way they pursue it in earnest. I'm not saying they have to, study the Vedas or do Vivekachudamani, but anybody who is intently set upon discovering the truth of what is limitless, because they're sick and tired of what is limited. It's somebody they describe in other contexts as somebody who has grown out of the society. Because it's what? Around and around and around you go. You just keep doing one limited thing after the other, after the other, after the other, and you end up with what? Lots of limited results. And a limited result plus a limited result plus a limited result is never going to equal limitless. Or put another way, a finite result or a finite action plus a finite action plus a finite action is never going to equal infinite. It's not possible. So actions are always finite. The results that come are also always finite. A lot of people are good with that. It's like, okay, fine. Knock yourselves out. But if there's somebody who comes along and says, I'm just so sick of this, I am so done. I am just so over all of this, because no matter what I do, it never adds up to something that lasts. I'm here for something that's going to last, not something that's going to come and go. What is that something that is lasting? That is infinite. I want infinite, for crying out loud. I'm sick of this stuff. That person is a person who heads in this direction. So when they head in this direction, if they are properly, attuned and or they're paying attention, even when the finite stuff comes along, they're not going to buy into it, because they're done. They're over it. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Finished. Done, done, done. So somebody who says, I really, really want what is lasting, what is limitless, what is infinite, then they cannot go in for ordinary course pursuits with limited ends, finite ends. So this is why these verses are saying this, what they're saying. They're saying that it doesn't matter how, quote, spiritual a person can be, if really they're not turning their attention to what is limitless, to what is infinite, then they can be born thousands of times in thousands of great settings, but it will always be born into what is finite, limited, and it will not give them anything that lasts. Like that song says, that Kansas song. Nothing lasts forever but the earth and sky slips away, and all your money won't another minute buy. Dust in the wind. And, we see that anyway all the time. Steve Jobs is a prime example. Didn't matter how successful he was, he couldn't stop his own passing. Nobody can stop this. So and it is all limiting. So here they're saying such people, and verse 7 says the same, for liberation is not born of good works, much less by wealth or other exalted actions. And there is a verse in Katha Upanishad, but it says basically that. Na karmana na prajaya danena tyagene ke amritattvamanashu parena nakam nihitam guhayam vibrajate yatyadaya vishanti vedanta vijnana sunishtitartha sannyasa yogat yadayat shuddha sattvaha te brahmaloke tu parantakale paramritat parimuchanti sarve dakram vipapam parameshma bhutam yet pundarikam puramagya saggastam tatrapi dakram gaganam vishokastasmin yadantas tadupasitavyam yo vedado sura prokto vedante cha pratishtitaha tasya prakriti linasya ya paraswamahesh shwaraha. Okay, got that? That is a verse that is really describing what I just said here. And that's why I said I'll give you the meaning. I'm not going to get into the meaning because we never get through the rest of it. But basically, it is describing exactly this. It's saying not by any of these kinds of pursuits will you ever become free, because all of these pursuits will keep you stuck in the morass of changing, limited, finite ends, means, and ends. And it never breaks away from that. So he says in verse 8, therefore such an accomplished person, having grown out of the society, should turn his or her attention to this end by being in the presence of a teacher and becoming attuned to this limitless pursuit. Remember, go big or go home. Big means limitless. We're going big. So this is really what this text is all about. Wrapping your mind around what is limitless. If you are not wrapping your mind around what is limitless, then your mind is wrapped around what is limited. And even though you are constrained to operate in the transactional world in that limited context, you have to give it something else to go on. And that is what is limitless. And that is what this topic is. And that is really who you are. We have to establish too, oh, by the way, that you are the one who is limitless. But just saying you are limitless means nothing. You have to see how that works. So that'll be coming up in the presentation in not the third one. But for now, we're just setting the stage here. So then in these final 5 verses that are, the preliminary part of this, he says, through constant alertness to what is limitless versus what is limiting, one can lift oneself from the ocean of endless change and finitude that only ends in drowning. So it's like, well, that's a real feel-good type of thing there. Meaning what? It's like, really speaking in a way, it sounds like a downer kind of verse, but it's just saying it like it is, which is that this endless, they often compare it, the ocean of samsara, means you're floating out there in the ocean, you're trying to stay afloat, and you doggy paddle, doggy paddle, doggy paddle, and then you start to sink down, and as you start to drown, you fight your way back up again. That's the imagery that's given. And that imagery is not pretty, but it's the idea of saying that as long as one is caught up in this constant preoccupation with limiting pursuits, limited ends, one will stay stuck. And one will be doggy paddling out there in the ocean. So it's, and how does one shift that? By focusing. You get out of the ocean by recognizing you're not in it in the first place. That takes vision, takes understanding that you are limitless. And again, we will see that. In verse 10, he says, may the seeker keep an eye on what is lasting, thereby sidestepping pursuits that keep him or her entrenched in the morass of endless becoming and rebirth. Okay, so this is all, again, setting the stage, but making it clear that, if one stays focused on only those types of pursuits, one will stay stuck. But all it takes is what? This is the beauty of it. People think, oh, so much work, or I have to take pilgrimages, or I have to do all these things to be spiritual. This is what people think. And they come along and say, actually, it's very simple. How do you shift? How do you get out of this? It's an attitude adjustment. Change your attitude. That's it. All you have to do is change the way you're looking at things. We're going to see how that works too. You just change how you look at it. But you can't change how you look at it if you don't know what to change it to. So the topic has to be addressed. How do you change it? Okay, if it's that simple, how do you change it? And then you have to change it and own it. And of course, all of that is, again, part and parcel of this, what we call this mental exercise, if you will, or mental focus. So he further reiterates. This is, I should say too, this is a style, Shankara's style, but also you see it with Krishna. They first they praise it, and then they create a problem, and then they praise something, and then they create a problem. And he's kind of going back and forth here in that way. And if you look at the verses further, we'll see more of that. But here he says, he reiterates what was said before by saying in verse 11 that selfless works and charitable acts help to purify the mind. So all of these actions are good. We're not saying don't do actions. We're not saying don't do limited actions. You can't but do limited actions. But understand that they are not going to set you free. Okay? They are not going to resolve this. They can prepare your mind so that your mind becomes available to focus on what is, but they do not solve these problems because they're limited. Limited means limited. Limited plus limited equals limited, or that's what it says here. Limited plus limited will always be limited and can never be equal limitless. Therefore, one has to do what? One can only make that shift, what I was just talking about, the attitude adjustment, by discriminative analysis and never by any number of actions. It's an attitude adjustment, it's a cognitive change. It's got to go up here in the mind. The mind has to shift. In order for the mind to shift, it's not enough to just tell you, oh, relax, you're limitless. You're infinite. You're one with everything. Meditate on that. People will do that maybe for a while, but then it's like, okay, something's wrong here. It's not working. So here, the intention is to give you. You have to have wherewithal. How are you limitless? How are you infinite? What does that look like? What do you look like? What does infinite look like? How am I one? And, how does all that work? Again, part of the unfolding of this text. And so in verse 12, he uses a different kind of approach by saying, the fear of seeing a snake can only be removed by discovering that one mistook a rope for a snake. The harmless rope was always there, yet not recognized. Okay, this is what they call adhyasa. In the world, we superimpose upon the world a reality that is not there. Like someone who sees a rope and thinks it's a snake. Why do they think it's a snake? Because they don't see the rope. Why don't they see the rope? Because they don't see it. They're not dumb. They just don't see it. So what do you have to do? Tell them it's not a snake, it's a rope. And then what happens? All that reaction and fear goes away because it was never a snake to begin with. It was always a rope. In the same way, we live in these worlds. We superimpose upon the world what we think it is, and we live and get caught up in our own spins about what we think that world is. Half the time, it's not pretty. And that's all because we really don't see the world for what it is. So in order to really appreciate what it is and not get stuck, caught up in it, you have to see it. That's what this is talking about. So abiding in the free self is not recognized due to the misrepresentation of the true nature of the self in the world. And this is just, again, setting the stage. How this works, we will also see. That's part of the unfolding and discovery and exploration. And finally, he just reemphasizes what he said before in the previous verses by saying, taking sacred baths, performing hundreds of pranayamas, or acts of charity are all limited actions, which can never provide the knowledge of ourselves as one who is limitless. Okay. Action does not equate to knowledge. Action is action. And knowledge, this is the emphasis is on knowledge because only knowledge really removes ignorance. Nothing else is going to remove, standing on your head is not going to remove ignorance. It will help your head and maybe your blood pressure, but it will not remove ignorance. What does it take? Knowledge. Because it's something like, what does it take to remove darkness? These two are mutually exclusive. A lot of things are not mutually exclusive, but these two are. So light and darkness. Where you have light, you can't have darkness. Where there's darkness, there can't be light. Doesn't work. So in order to remove darkness, you require light. In the same way, in order to remove ignorance, you require knowledge. You can't, it's standing on your head, going, doing all kinds of actions, as he said, whether it's sacred actions or other actions, will never remove ignorance. What it takes is knowledge. And that's what will be presented in the coming sessions. And next week, this is the setting the stage, session. He's going to set the stage further in the next session. We'll see about how, and that's in the next slide, how the attitudes, what are the attitudes that enable a person to really open their minds and recognize the truth. So by adapting, again, I said earlier, attitude adjustment. One has to have an attitude adjustment so that the mind becomes available. You need a mind which is available. And this is not to say you don't already have a mind that's available. I don't know whether you do or not. Chances are your mind is pretty darn available. Why? Because if it wasn't available, you wouldn't be sitting here. So it's not like you're starting from scratch. The verses that we will see next week are all about doing checkups on your own mind to see whether or not you need to do anything to adjust your mind. It may be you don't have to do anything, but these are presented to help you create a mind that is able to study, appreciate, and absorb what is going to be unfolded in the other sessions. It's something like, in order for somebody to understand calculus, they have to have the other mental preparation of the other studies of mathematics before they can understand calculus, generally speaking. There may be a few exceptions, but generally you need what is called a prepared mind. So the mind has to be prepared before, you can't start dumping calculus into a child's mind. It's not going to absorb it. In the same way, you can't start just, throwing this stuff at somebody and saying, just get it. They have to have a mind which is receptive. So that's what we'll see next week. What is that receptive mind? And what are the attitudes that help to make it receptive if it is not already receptive. And it may be that you don't need to do, little if anything. But it's critical to know that before you really start looking at what comes next. So I hope that all made sense. And or of course now is your opportunity to raise questions. And not that you have to have questions, but if you do have questions, please feel free to ask them. And thank you. Om. Om Tat Sat. Acharya means one who is learned in a specific subject matter. And Acharya can be an Acharya of any topic. So it's just a sort of a description of a person who has a solid knowledge of something. And in this case, and it's given to somebody as a title of respect also. So his name is Shankara. And actually, I know I mentioned in the lead-ins to, or the descriptions that were given out ahead of this, that Shankara is attributed to having, is said to have written this text. But some scholars debate that and say that it may have been some of his students that actually composed it. But at the end of the day, even if it was his students who put it together, it is still something that they learned from him. And so it doesn't create any real challenges from that perspective. Because, again, the knowledge is the knowledge is the knowledge. No, the Gita is what is known as a smriti. Smriti means it's something that is authored. A smriti is something that is authored and it came later. And in fact, the Bhagavad Gita really, Krishna is, he makes no secret of the fact that he's quoting the Upanishads in a lot of his verses, left and right. A lot of what Krishna says are verses that came from the Upanishads. The Upanishads are what comes at the end of the Vedas, and is what is known as Vedanta. And so there's lots and lots of these texts called the Upanishads. And, each text has a different topic, but they themselves are, a study that could just keep you enthralled for years, the various Upanishads. But they came as a part of this tradition that it was thousands of years in play when Krishna showed up. So Krishna is not considered to be the starter of this tradition, and Krishna himself says that he's just like everybody else who comes along. They call him an alankara. He's an ornament to the tradition because he comes along and really brings it home, so to speak, makes it understandable to others. Well, there are lots of different descriptions about how what they have is, they have that trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and really they're personifications of what you see, the forces in the creation. We are witnesses to the fact that it's an endless cycle of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. And so these are the forces, and they are to be respected as expressions of the Creator, of the ultimate God, if you will, the intelligence. Whether you want to characterize it as an entity or just say it's the all-pervasive intelligence, doesn't matter. But just that these forces are found within the setup of the creation. And really speaking, people say, well, I don't want to worship any of that stuff. I don't believe in it, and blah, blah, blah. And to which we say, you don't have to. It's no big deal. but where they're really coming from with all of this, all of these forces, is that they are, in fact, the forces found within the setup of the creation. And if you really think about it, it's like you want to be tapped into those forces. And why would you want to be tapped in? Because you gain benefits. They're all powers. And it's like, I want some of that power. Give me some of that power. I'll take some of that power. So that's why they encourage people to pursue some kind of relationship with these forces. And they personify the forces because it's easier to relate to a personification than it is to just tap into an abstract force. So that's why they say, okay, the power of creation, we call it Brahmaji. The power of maintenance or sustenance, let's call it Vishnu, and give it a form. And the power of destruction, that's Shiva. Again, a form. And there's a lot of beautiful symbolism in all of it. But it's a lot easier to relate to that than just to relate to the abstract expression of that power. Somebody did a study once and they stopped at 44 million. So why do they have so many gods? Because really speaking, what they're saying is there are not many gods, there's only God. There's only God. And so only God means everywhere you look is God. And there's nothing separate from God, and you're not separate from God either. You are also. It's something like there are a bazillion waves in the ocean, but none of those waves are separate from the ocean. Does that make sense? So none of the waves are separate from the ocean. They come from the ocean, exist in the ocean, they go back to the ocean. So in the same way, all these gods come from the source, and they have as though a purpose, and they go back. And that when you tap into these various gods, you are in fact saying, I'm tapping into the ocean. I'm using a wave, but I'm tapping into the ocean. So in the same way, I'm tapping into this God, but I'm really tapping into the source, because that's really what I want. The idea is that God is everywhere, and anything, anywhere you turn is not away from God. It's really saying you want unbroken unity, harmony. Why do people strive for unity? Even to creating disunity, they want unity because it's harmony. And if you are being in harmony, then you feel great. If there's disharmony, you can't enjoy it. So the striving for oneness is all about achieving a sense of harmony and well-being. And how Vedanta presents that is what, again, will be presented in one of the coming sessions. So, all right. I'm sorry we had these technical difficulties, but they should be working for all intents and purposes next week. So, and thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I also look forward to seeing everyone next week.